Well, hello, Dr. D. How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm I've been talking about humans and how humans human all day today, and I was excited to get on with you. Um, I got to be honest with you, I don't know what we're talking about today. So,
Well, good.
uh,
That's where I'm going to come in and say, hey, we've done the modules of energy creation, we've done digestion, and I think the audience wants to learn a little bit about what you know about the immune system.
immune
And
system, right? Yes,
so
next
let's,
logical. Yeah,
of
yeah.
course, logical, yes.
That we probably should have led with the immune system, given that it's so important, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. I think that a lot of people would probably they're probably interested in hearing a little bit what you have to say about this. So let's start.
Yeah, it's the immune system is an interesting system because much like the intestinal tract, it's not oh, exactly one system. So there's different parts of the system, right? And so
Wow.
what most people are referring to when they're talking about the immune system or the innate immune system is our body's ability to fight off infection. So the way this is described in Eastern medicine, and I think this is one of the areas that they do a really nice job of creating this visual, right? Is that they talk about it as being Wei Qi or the defensive exterior. And there's a lot of battle analogies that they use in Eastern medicine. It's very aggressive.
Yep.
And so they talk a little bit about saying, hey, your body is like a castle. Okay. And you have various systems in and around the castle that try to keep all the defenders that are trying to attack you, keep them out. And that's a nice way for me to kind of remember it. Of okay, you're trying to keep the things out, but what happens when it gets in? And that's a
Yep.
different level
Huh.
of defense, right?
Okay.
And
All
so
right.
we really want to talk about how we're doing both and what impacts that. And then that's where Eastern medicine tends to lose people because they use too many analogies. But
Fair.
starting with the areas of the immune system that most people are concerned with, let's face it, you have kids, you're going to get sick. The kids are going to get sick. They're training their immune system. They're
Perfect.
exposed to things all the time, right? We're exposed to things all the time. We're exposed to things in the gym quite a bit. In
Yeah.
fact, I think I saw a recent study that said the average dumbbell has more bacteria than the average toilet seat, right? Like it's a treasure trove for germs
Sure.
with people touching things and whatnot. And so we want to talk about like, okay, how do we quantify our immune system and its function? And because we're around these things all the time, we're not, germaphobes, close your ears. You're not going to avoid being around germs. Okay. They're on you and around you all the time. It's just how strong your defensive exterior is. And once it gets in, how strong your internal fighters are to kind of kick all that stuff out and overcome it. And
Cool.
so there's things that tend to negatively impact our immune system's ability to keep things out and then fight it when it gets in. And those things tend to be things like high stress level. And it really doesn't matter where the stress is coming from, that can weaken the immune system. Um, Exhaustion, being tired. So that's certainly a repair section. And then, believe it or not, digestive disruption. And that's a big one. Because if we're not able to produce energy, if we're not able to separate our what's in our intestinal tract from the rest of the innate immune system, we're certainly going to have some sort of immune reaction. And those things are ways that we can start to quantify it. The other thing that we can pay attention to, and this is probably the one that most people will think of, which is, how often do you get sick? And if you can show me somebody who says, oh, I never get sick, I'll show you somebody who doesn't have kids because they're little petri dishes. Uh,
Of course.
yeah, and it's also like how much you come in contact with people. So if you're working on people, if you're back before the plague when people actually worked with people in office, uh, you had more contact with humans, and in close proximity, you take on their pathogens, and it's more likely then that you can get sick. But
Yep.
being sick occasionally is not a big deal. It's when it becomes too excessive that you want to pay attention to it. So if you want to think about the 4 ways that you can begin to quantify how your immune system is doing, you say, where's your stress level? Where's your digestive ability, right? How tired are you, like, or energy wise on a daily basis? And then certainly the last one, which is how often do you get sick? Okay. Now, if you want to quantify those or number them on a scale of 1 to 10, how physically stressed or exhausted you are, how your sleep's going, how your psychological stress is doing, and then how many times a year you get sick. Um, Anything north of fives is going to be in that area of interest. And if you're getting sick more than twice a year, it's probably something that we want to pay attention to. Now,
Wow.
question for you though: how long do you think the average person and the average cold should be? How long should it
Hmm.
last? What do you think that is?
All things considered, maybe 4 or 5 days.
It's pretty close, actually. Yeah.
And meaning, like I said, with our background, maybe, not taking this, this supplement, or even if a doctor gave you something, yeah, it'll last 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, and on average, what we're going to look at is like the right in that 3 or 4. So you're
Okay.
right in that space. So if somebody is getting sick more than 2 to 3 times a year and staying sick for more than 3 to 4 days, that's something where we would quantify and say, okay, this person's probably got a compromised immune system. Okay, so if you get that person who's sick every month and they're sick for a week at a time, we might need some immune support, right?
Okay. Yep.
Even for the person who's not getting sick, uh, more than 2 or 3 times a year, there may be they may be more likely to get sick at a certain time of year, right? And that would be an area that we could also look at and say, okay, well, if as we head into this season where we know you tend to get sick, what can we do to reduce the likelihood you're going to get sick? And then the next thing we would look at would be to say, how can we reduce the severity and the length of that illness, right?
Yep.
And there's a number
Yeah.
of things that we can do to help with that. So in the Eastern world, okay, we talked. Did we talk about this? We talk about energy creation as yang.
We did. Yep.
Yeah,
A little bit. Yep.
a little bit. So yang. So this is really cool. We can talk about this a little bit as well because it does have a role in immunity, which
Okay.
is when you create energy, yang tonics and yang tonifying uh, activities and foods and things uh, tend to have an ability to activate things like uh, ATP, our adenosine triphosphate, we've discussed, sirtuins, right? So the cellular activity levels, and then also have a positive effect potentially on our NAD pool, right? And NAD is
Mm.
all the rage right now in terms of saying, as it drops, I think if I remember correctly, it's something like drops in half at 20, 40, and 60, roughly, which is
Mm.
also the areas where we see aging tend to
Yeah.
happen.
Sure.
And so until recently, there weren't great human studies on boosting NAD with niacinamide, cyanide products, but now it
Yeah.
looks like we're getting some that are, doing better. The research is getting better, so that's positive. But one of
Better
the things we
absorption. Yeah.
better absorption, better
Yeah.
levels of NAD in the human. Uh,
Okay.
but we can also use yang tonics for these things. And so
Mm.
that kind of helps us with our energy. So in terms of a prophylactic or something that you want to do to help maintain your energy, throughout the year and maintain your immune system, just having energy to defend it is going to be important. So
Right.
yang tonics, things like sirtuin activators, that's where you can use a little bit of fasting on that too. Uh,
Wow.
but yang herbs and activities and those things. And then the yin side, so yang, and then you have yin. The yin side, in this case, would be the immunity. And so we're looking at immunoglobulins and antioxidants and those types of things in that space. So
Okay.
you have your yin and your yang, and they both work to support the immune system. Acutely, we're going to look at the yin to support the immune system, especially when we're having any issues. But year round, we're going to be looking at balancing that and making sure that we have
Yeah.
some of that yang activation. Right.
Great.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, you say, well, okay, well, great. What do you do with that? Well, There are immune boosting herbs that we can use. And one of the immune boosting herbs that we'll come back to because it's actually a dude book. Well, you know what? We'll talk about it now. Is
Sure.
cordyceps. So, Last of Us, the show on HBO, has done a really good job of terrifying everyone about the use of cordyceps and what it could do if it got into humans. But cordyceps are an interesting little herbal compound in that they seem to have an affinity for tonifying yang and yin. So they can actually boost the immune system. They can actually uh, uh, boost the energy creation system as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's a dual formula. Now, not all of those are like that. So you can use things though like ginseng and
Yep. Use that.
asparagus. Actually, asparagus root could do that. Astragalus is probably one of our main herbs that we would use to boost the immune system. And then another more obscure white, I think it's a white Opogonus radix, which is a white asparagus. And if you put these herbs in combination, it actually creates a defensive exterior formula and that's been used for thousands of years in Eastern medicine to both help people recover from illness and also avoid illness. So it's kind of an interesting formula. But so one of the things that we would say for people would be if you lose a lot of fluids when you're getting sick and you want to stay hydrated, that's one of the products of or benefits of using these types of herbs. It can help you with your fluid metabolism and help you maintain your hydration. It's also massively antioxidant. Okay,
Yeah.
so free radical damage and repairing for those things.
Wow.
So there's all these Western medical implications and actions and benefits that we see from taking these Eastern herbs. But the things that I actually wanted to share with you, so we can come back to that. I want to get your questions on it.
Yep.
Is that probably the most impactful thing that people can do that they're unaware of to boost their immune system is the use of a topical herb, okay, called moxa. And moxa is not actually the herb. Moxa is a rolled and charred herb that you kind of light like a cigar and you use to induce heat in an area on the skin. And
Yep.
it sounds a little bit like witchcraft and wizardry. It is. In fact, there's a strong rumor and some anecdotal evidence that J.K. Rowling, when she was writing Harry Potter, would go and look for inspiration in Chinatown. And that mugwort, which is the
Mm.
herb that's used, Artemisia, for moxa, may have been the root for muggles, believe it or not. If for you Harry Potter fans out there.
Fans out there. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, but there are a lot of herbal uses in that movie, none of which are overly accurate, I will say, but it is kind of cool to see it in there. But
Yeah.
what
Rightfully so.
effectively they would say that again?
I said rightfully so. Yeah. Otherwise, people would
Yeah,
be, looking for those. So.
yeah. So so one of the things that you can do with this moxa is you burn it and then you place it, over the skin, and you maybe, like an inch or so, so you can feel the heat, and you try to work it up to about a 7 on the heat scale.
Okay.
Something people can do at home. And what it does, especially if you use a point, now there's a specific point on the shin that's referred to as stomach 36. Okay. And the research has showed that if you actually light this moxa and you use it for about 2 minutes a day on that point, that you will, in 6 weeks, significantly
Yeah.
improve your white blood cell count.
Wow.
And then if you do that, I think it's the research was something like if you did that, continue that on for 6 months, that it would be a permanent level raise in things, which is fairly interesting.
Yes.
Now there are reasons why white blood cell would be very low that may not be able to be improved by this. Certainly there, but
Okay.
yeah. So it's fairly interesting, and part of the reason that we think it works is it's actually very similar to using an infrared heat signature. So effectively, what you're doing is stimulating um, you know, you know, white blood cell, T cell, and B cell activity, immune activity through that stimulation that is effectively using an herbal laser. Okay.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. So, there's a lot of
Me
supplements we
too.
can take, and there's different things we can do in terms of our habits and our lifestyle. But moxa for $1 a roll in 2 minutes of your life can significantly change your T cell and B cell activity, and really help you with your immunity. And that's probably the best kept secret that we have on immunity in Eastern medicine. So I'm curious though, Bryan, because I've talked a lot about herbs that are a mouthful, and some weird
Of course.
burning of a herbal laser over the shin that might have inspired been the inspiration for Muggles and Harry Potter's world. But what do you think, and what are the things that you've noticed with clients and people who've listened to you lecture? What are the questions that they have about immunity, and how to evaluate it, how to improve it? What are the things that they're curious about that we could maybe create some clarity on today?
Well, being that, you know, part of your business I know that you do is, strength and conditioning. A lot of mine is that as well, just because I don't have the background as you. But one thing that I recognize, and even people that I've trained over the last 20 years, is it seems like when someone is coming off of a cold, let's just say a general clientele, and they're like, all right, and they're really upset. Today's Thursday, right? And like, oh, it's a big weekend, and I really want to get a workout in before the Memorial Day weekend. And they're like on a scale, no one really knows because you're not inside your cells, but let's say they're a 7 out of 10 from the cold they had 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And they come in, and back 15 years ago, I would have whooped their ass. And then what would naturally happen is then I wouldn't see them because it's the holiday weekend. And I'd ask, oh, how'd everything go? Like, oh, that cold came back on, maybe not 2 times, but you know what I'm saying? It came back not with another round.
Right,
And
right.
this is a more broad question I'm asking because now all these years later, I've never even got an answer from anyone. I worked for that functional medicine doctor, and he kind of gave me a little bit. But in your opinion, what do you do with clients if they're coming off of a cold and they want to get in and train? Is there a percentage of, you and I talked about the neural or the metabolic training on some of these? Is there a specific protocol that you just so they could get in and move? What's
Yeah.
your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really good
Yeah.
observation too.
Okay.
For people when they train, so one of the things that I've heard a lot is, I just want to get a good sweat in,
Sure.
and they'll want a sauna, or they'll want to train, or they'll do some cardio. So training is a lot of discussion of manipulating stimulus,
Yeah.
and we manipulate that stimulus to give us a response. Okay. And you're well aware of this. So if we train somebody hard with a high intensity, a heavy load, that's going to stimulate the neurological system and force adaptation, so we get stronger. Um, if we do it in a sliding down that scale on one end, if we move towards the middle, we're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to lighten up on that load a little bit, and I'm going to give you more volume. I'm going to give you more sets, more reps, and more time under tension. And we're going to break down the body in a mechanical way and force a hypertrophic response. So that's going to increase inflammation, right? And that's how we create muscle development. And that's a good thing because that's where our red blood cells are created, but also in the short term, it creates damage. And then you go a little further down the end and you get your metabolic stuff over here, right? And you say, okay, well, I'm going to sweat a bunch, and I'm just going to create a lot of water through the skin, and really work on caloric expenditure. And what I would say is that when people come off from upper respiratory infections and things that would affect their oxygen levels, okay, they're going to probably want to move. They feel icky. They want to move.
Hmm.
They've been stagnant. So they're going to gravitate towards this metabolic stuff and moving around, which can be a good thing.
Okay.
At the same time, um, you're just basically putting your foot down on the immune hose. Okay. And you're putting yourself in the spot where you're like, yeah, I mean, you got that stuff out of you, but now you tanked yourself again.
Yeah.
Right. And so a little bit of sweating can be fine, but most people, overshoot that little bit of sweating like a Kentucky show horse, and they're running
Yep.
fast and free through the field. So they overshoot it. We certainly don't want to put them into a hypertrophic phase where we create a lot of inflammation, because that deals more with the repair, and we already have our resources stretched and we're fighting off all these invaders. Now all of a sudden we're going to say, hey, I've got to deal with a lot of oxidative damage. So what generally is best for people is that you either spend a little bit of time on the neurological end and taxing the nervous system slightly, or what I tend to recommend is um, you keep a low to moderate intensity and you significantly reduce their volume
Okay.
and you don't overshoot it. So you contract the muscles, right? You get, maybe a full body type deal where you're doing 2 or 3 sets, for a couple different body parts. And you keep it under 10 sets. You keep it, it's like being in the sun. I'm a pale guy. Okay. I can get a tan, but I don't need to spend 4 hours in the sun. I get back into it, 15, 20 minutes. I'm good.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the approach you want to have when you go to train again, is that
Cool.
I don't need to overshoot this. I need to do this. But for most people, if you want to be safe, if you're hitched and you want to, you just want to live here, low intensity, steady state, keep your heart rate between 130 BPMs and, do that for 20, 30 minutes. You'll feel
Awesome.
good. You'll get your endorphins going. You'll sweat a little bit and you will not tax your nervous system. Now that depends on the individual. So if somebody's very well adapted to neurological stimulus, they lift heavy and those types of things, they can probably handle that a little bit more, right? They can
Yep.
handle that. But for your average everyday person, I would say a couple body parts, 2 or 3 sets, 20 minutes, just get contraction in the muscle. That actually helps us with the detoxification ability, right? It's moving things through the body. And then a little bit of light, low intensity, steady state walking at 120 to 130 BPMs is the way to go. But also, Brian, really good observation on the idea that as soon as you press down and force that immune response, if there's nothing there and your resources are spread thin, all they're going to do is see a recurrence of those symptoms, and often they'll get worse. And that's a very similar approach to what we have with I wouldn't cold plunge and I wouldn't use sauna until it's basically gone.
Just gonna
Uh,
ask that. Yep.
yeah, yeah. Well, what's your thought on that? Have you have an experience with it or?
Well, yeah. Now, I mean, as you know, they're popping up everywhere. Chicago for you, here, St. Louis. There's a new facility going to pop up down the street for me. And they want people to do it as much as possible, and that's great because those are two modalities that are very good.
Yeah,
But then they don't want to explain the science behind it to people or when or how. And as probably the same thing with you, I always just I'm not above it or anything, meaning like I don't think badly on them or anything, but like I just like to educate my people a lot better so then they know when and how to do things, and naturally
yeah,
with and and I don't know. I think, you know, there's so much out there, and that's where I'm trying to build this, as you say, program Delta, and trying to get people to understand everyone thinks the education is like, oh, I just want to lift weights, or okay, and I get that, reps, 10 reps, whatever. But when you get to the why, which is why you and I are talking here, is because you're explaining a lot of the whys of things that I even don't have answers to. This is the knowledge that's so important for, you talked about when we first started, the humans, right? Like when you know these things, it's great. You don't turn to it. You don't, like, it would naturally seem sweat it out in a infrared sauna, right? I mean, it gets hot, it's quick,
yeah,
but yet if you're going to compromise yourself in the process of actually you think you're doing better, uh, I don't know. Maybe that's the hill I've always tried to die on lately of the last 10 years of like, listen, I love bodybuilding, I love sport, I love all that, but like you have to do things properly. And I
yeah,
think we're just now, and I think you and I've off camera a few times have talked about that. We're starting to really have people that understand that. You understand that. I'm learning, I understand, but I'm learning more from you and other people that when trainers are able to be that person in front of in front of clients, tell them, well, no, 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 no. Let's hold back. Maybe wait 2 days to do that sauna, and then maybe that will be your boost to kick up the immune system with everything. You and I've talked about it, two
yeah,
podcasts ago. So
yeah, yeah. You touched on something there, which I think is a really good point. I saw somebody last month now who was asking a question about, it was lecturing, and we were asking a question about doing their cardio in an infrared sauna, and I was like, oh no, and then I thought about it. I thought about it while she was asking the question. I'm like, so I was working through the mechanics of it,
Yeah.
You bring your bike in the infrared. So like I was trying to understand how this worked. And she goes, no, 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 it's already in there.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go
There's
to the
places like
spot
that. Yeah.
and I was like, oh, this is like a company. And she's like, oh
Hmm.
yeah. It's like you go and you ride your bike in this bike in a sauna. And I was like, oh, look, there there's not one guy. Okay. This is like a character is not based on a real person. It's just based on stories of people.
Okay.
The number of times I've seen people walk into a sauna and ice their knee, I can't count on my hands and your hands. And I'm not punching down. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to make fun of them. I am curious what they actually think is happening there because you say, well, you if your knee, so and I have a point to this. Bear with me. It's a long driveway to a decent sized house,
No.
which is if your knee is bothering you and it's inflamed, okay, and what you're trying to do by putting ice onto it is reduce the temperature or the inflammation
Okay.
in that area, but you're systemically pumping heat, which is why you're in sauna, then not only are you not being effective with your icing, you also brought your ice into a 180-degree box. So it's not going to
Yeah.
last very long. Okay. So in most cases, we would say, yeah, don't ice an injury unless it's overly swelling in the first 20 minutes, because what you're going to do is stop blood flow and healing. You actually want to promote blood flow to that. So don't ice it.
Yep.
And then you brought it into a 180-degree room to do that. And I think that is on par with somebody riding a bike in an infrared sauna, which is all you're doing is increasing the fluid with which you push through your skin and reducing the amount of time that you can spend in there.
Yeah.
So it's not good for you're not going to, with little or effort, you're not going to but you're not going to improve your conditioning necessarily.
No.
You are creating some level of inflammation hypertrophically on your quads. If you really want to push, you're not going to get that same response because you're cutting the inflammation out theoretically.
Yeah.
You're dehydrating yourself faster. I get it. It probably feels like you're working harder, but it's not overly advantaged, right? It's probably disadvantaged.
Sure.
And so for that reason, you would look at it and say, look, if you're training in the Mojave Desert and it happens to be at 110 and you're doing it and you're tough and you're getting it through, that's totally fine. If you're trying to climatize to that, I get it. That would be a situation in which that would make sense.
Yes, sir.
Other than that, I don't really see the upside.
No.
And that's often what I see with people in the way they handle their training or their nutrition around uh, things like being cold and flu, right? Like vitamin C comes to mind. People
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm drinking orange juice, got to get that vitamin C. Like, yeah, I mean, ideally to optimize it, you take a gram to 3 grams a day of vitamin C. It's going to probably take 10 to 12 to 14 days for that to really make an impact. Though some research will tell you it can start to work within 4 hours,
Okay.
but you're already sick. So that's not going to be a thing that you're going to take when you get sick. That's a
Yeah.
thing you're going to take before you get sick to reduce the likelihood you're going to get sick or keep high enough so that it reduces the severity of your illness. Once you're sick, it's like saying, I lost my house and now's the time for me to start saving money. It's like, okay, fair, but like, it, okay, yeah, good for
Right.
next time, right? I'm not going to
Mhm.
help you right now.
Next time.
And I certainly don't mean to, make light of that type of a situation. That's awful. But I would say that when it comes to immunity, uh, there are things you can do on a daily basis, keeping your vitamin D up. Yeah, taking vitamin C, that's fantastic. Making
Okay.
sure that you take your yang tonics, and
Yeah.
you have some sirtuin activity and those types of things. I really like, if NAD stuff is getting better, that's fine. But I really like to pay attention to detoxification ability, things like glutathione, keeping the lymph and blood moving. So the interstitium is a thing we should actually talk about. Maybe we should talk about detox next time,
Okay.
and how it
We will.
how it fits in here, because you're talking about the defense against pathogens, and then also talking about the removal of pathogens, right?
Okay.
Which is what we do with detoxification in a way. So I think all those things are good. I think having moxa to boost your, your T cells and B cells is a good idea. Acupuncture can do that too, but using a moxa is a very cheap. It's the people's medicine. It doesn't cost
Good.
much, just a little effort. Um,
Okay.
and you got to be careful because it does get very hot and people burn themselves. But the other thing I'll say is there's a hidden formula um, that is, I think, probably one of the most successful formulas I've ever used. In fact, I have people, I have people that I know who perhaps I've not worked with personally in more than a decade. And occasionally I'll still get messages from them of if I know of anywhere they can find if we're out or their their local shop, the herbal shop's out, they still want to find this herb because it's so powerful and successful at reducing the likelihood that you're going to get sick and stay sick. And that is the herbal formula known as Gan Mao Ling. Gan Mao
Uh-huh.
Ling is it's actually a Japanese formula, and I think it was, if I remember correctly, made in the 50s. So it's a fairly new kid on the block in Eastern medicine.
Yeah.
It's not Chinese. I believe it is Japanese, though it uses Chinese herbs.
Okay.
And it is a massively antiviral formula that is kind of like an Asian coldies, but it
Ah,
works even more. It's even more successful anecdotally on our end. Um, Gan Mao Ling, we can't keep it on the shelves, especially
yeah.
times a year when it comes available. People will, you know, buy cases of it from
Yeah.
us and keep it on hand because
I
as
remember
soon
that.
as yeah, and as soon as you start to get sick and you drop that stuff, if it actually comes to fruition, your common cold and those types of things, it might take it from a 7 or an 8 down to a 3 or a 4. It might go from 3 to 4 days to 1 to 2 days. It's a banger, and
Okay.
people really so Ganmao Ling, Moxa, your vitamin D and your vitamin C on a regular basis. Taking astragalus based formulas, maybe with some young activators. Those are things that you can do outside of washing your hands, and then not having kids. And then the other thing I would say,
Number one.
Brian, yeah, number one is keep an eye on your HRV because seeing massive drops, more than 20% drops in your HRV is often associated with something, some sort of pathogenic attack. The nervous system gets attacked. So you're
Yep.
exhausted, you didn't sleep, you've got an infection, something's coming on. It happens. And that's when, and even when you're doing your vitamin D and C and you're taking those herbs and you can still get sick. But when that drops, if you have those things like that Ganmao Ling on hand, that's when you start hitting that. And you'll
Right.
see people go from getting sick 2 to 3 times a year to getting half sick 1 to 2 times a year, right? And they can head it
Right.
off at the pass. And I don't know, in your life, if you're sick 3 times a year for 3 to 4 days, I mean, that's 2 weeks of your life, right? And if you can get a week back of energy, what's that worth, right? So I think
Everything
it's
to me. Yep.
useful. Yeah. And then also the amount of time lost in the gym in your overall goals, because it does take you longer. You do have to rehab yourself back the first couple days, getting back into it. So the immune system is certainly important in the gym. It's certainly important in optimization. There's a couple of strategies, and don't underestimate the ability to put hydrochloric acid on board to avoid foodborne pathogens. Anytime you
Cool.
eat something you feel funny, that, and then next time maybe we focus in on the discussion of detoxification because that plays a role in making sure we get all that stuff out of us and feel less sticky, right? Have it linger around, which I think is probably an important topic as well.
It is. I think, well, that's a great kind of send off. I think the detox part, we are just talking about that with a client in the gym the other day. I guess this will be a good education piece for people that one are my clients, but also other people that have seen and understanding how simplistic yet every day the detox process is, and not some cosmopolitan, fruit detox. And once again,
Right.
I'm sure there's versions of it that you might have used for a purpose, right? But every day you are doing something, and getting that information to the out to the people is going to be wonderful. So thank you, and I think next time, let's talk about that. And thank you for your time today, Dr. D.
Yeah, you're welcome. Go out and get your Gonmel Ling. Take your vitamin D. Wash your hands, kids, and track that HRV and make sure it's not dropping. And next time we will talk about detox and how to support it with more than juice cleanses. How about that?
Sounds great. Well, thanks, Dr. D. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks,
All right.
Brian. Talk to you
All
later.
right. Bye-bye.